So on Thursday, we will do the final examination. This is an opportunity for you to question and challenge my understanding of the world. And so today, what I'm going to do is review all that we've learned this semester and combine together into a framework of how the world works. Okay? So the main driving question of the semester is, why did the US attack Iran? Right? So this is the central mystery of the world today. Because even today, Donald Trump has yet to articulate a reason for attacking Iran. And I do understand that right now there are ceasefire negotiations going on, but unless we can properly understand or diagnose the rationale for this war, it's very hard for us to appreciate the difficulty of coming to a ceasefire, okay? So I'm going to present to you the three major reasons that we learned in this class as to why the United States attacked Iran. Okay? The first major explanation is just geopolitics. And so, according to this theory, what the United States is most afraid of is that Russia, Iran, and China would come together into a grand alliance. Okay, so you have Russia here, you have China here, and you have Iran here. Okay? Now, why the United States is afraid of this grand alliance is that if these three nations were to combine together and just trade amongst themselves, they could encompass the entire Eurasian continent, which would include Europe, the entirety of the Middle East, the GCC, Africa, India. And they could negate the American maritime power and just trade amongst themselves using railways constructed by China. All right? And there's nothing America could do about it. And this is a huge problem because right now the Americans have $39 trillion in debt. And so the only way to finance this debt is to force others to continue to buy US treasuries. Okay? So the reason why the United States attacked Iran is to force everyone to buy US treasuries. Why? Well, because if you attack Iran, you knock off at least 20% of the world's energy. And as a result, the world, Europe, China, and Japan specifically, are forced to buy more US treasuries. And then, by knocking out Iran, you can then start to control the world's major choke points, in the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Gibraltar. This is Strait of Malacca, actually. This is the Strait of Gibraltar. This is the Cape of Good Hope. And so as a result, you control the world's trade. So if the world wants resources, they can only do so from buying from the Western Hemisphere that America controls, okay? So attacking Iran is crucial to achieving this geopolitical vision of America in order to maintain the American empire. Okay, so that's the first major reason. Okay, there's also another explanation, which is different, very different, and this is eschatological. Number two is eschatological. And what this means is that there are religious fanatics within the American empire who believe that a war in the Middle East will launch a chain of events that will ultimately culminate in the return of Jesus. Okay, so these are people who believe very strongly in the Bible, and they believe that what the Bible teaches them is that if there is a war in the Middle East, okay, this Iran war, this will lead to the third temple, which would also involve the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in the Islamic world, which would lead to the war of Gog and Magog, which would lead to the rise of the Antichrist. And at this point, if you are Jewish, you believe that this will lead to the coming of the Messiah and the ushering in of the Messianic age. If you're a Christian, you believe that this will lead to the second coming of Jesus and the rapture and the millennium of peace in the world before the day of judgment, and then heaven comes to earth. Okay? Now what's interesting about this eschatological vision is that it also aligns with both the Islamic eschatology as well as the Orthodox eschatology. Okay? This is important because the Islamic, of course, is Iran, and the Orthodox is Russian. And so what's really strange is that the four major nations involved right now in this war in the Middle East, including Iran, Russia, the United States, and Israel, share similar eschatological outlook. And as a result, they're all actually, in many ways, working together to achieve a certain geopolitical outcome, which includes the building of the third temple, the war of Gog and Magog, the coming of the Antichrist, and ultimately the end of the world. Okay? So that's the second explanation for what's happening. The third reason is actually the most mundane. Okay? And the third reason is just imperial decline. And when an empire declines, it does all sorts of stupid things because internally it is fracturing for three reasons. The first reason is financialization, which is to say that you have a few people who control all the capital, and as a result, all they do is force everyone into debt slavery. And then everyone's forced to engage in speculation in order to try to get rich, because there's no honest way to make a living. All right? So capital controls the empire, and this leads to corruption, inequality, and debt, and ultimately slavery. Second problem is demographic crisis. And this is true for all empires in decline in that young people refuse to have children. But not only that, but old people live longer and longer. So you have this huge problem where old people live longer and longer, they have pensions, they require young people to work, but young people don't want to have babies. Okay? So just naturally, over time, the empire's going to collapse. So the way for the empire to resolve this issue is through immigration. So they welcome millions and millions of outsiders in order to do the jobs no one actually wants to do. And this leads to ethnic tension within the empire, okay? The third reason, the third symptom of imperial decline is something called elite overproduction, which is a phrase coined by a historian named Peter Turchin. And he argues that if you look at all societies in decline, it's driven by the fact that you have certain elites who want to control policy, who want power. But power by definition is a zero-sum game. And so these elites compete for the limited positions of power. And this leads to civil war. And one manifestation of the civil war is that this war is projected outwards. Okay? That's why an empire does stupid things like go invade Venezuela for no reason, goes attacks Iran for no reason. Right now, America is talking about taking over Greenland, Canada, Mexico, Colombia, Cuba, okay? So this is the other explanation for why things are happening the way they are, because the empire's decline, all these internal conflicts that are destroying the empire from within are projected outwards. And so this turmoil is projected onto Iran, okay? So these are the three major reasons. Now what's interesting about these three major reasons is that they're actually not in competition with each other. In fact, they support each other. And honestly, they lead to the same outcomes. If you believe in the eschatological model, okay, you believe that this is the end of days, you believe that the Israelis will build the third temple, you believe that this war in the Middle East will just expand outwards before it encompasses the entire world, something called the War of Gog and Magog. You believe that a charismatic leader will rise to unify much of the world. And if you just analyze the geopolitical framework, you can actually come to the same conclusions. If you look at the imperial decline framework, you can also come to the same conclusions. Okay, this is really, really strange in that you have these three divergent explanations for what's going on, but in many ways, they're very, very similar. In fact, they lead to the same conclusions. So what I want to discuss today is, why is this the case? Why is it that eschatology and geopolitics and imperial decline all end up giving the same understanding of the world and forces us to make certain predictions about the world? Okay? So, my explanation to you is this. Eschatology is really just an understanding of geopolitics framed allegorically. Okay? So when we're saying this is that what eschatology really is, it's not religion. What it is it takes thousands of years of human history, tens of thousands of years of human history, and condenses it into stories that then can be told to children and passed on through generations and generations. Okay? So it is impossible for humans to pass on complex history over thousands of years. But it is easy to take this history, frame it into stories, and then tell it to your children, remember it, and then these children will then pass it on to their children. And then this is how we develop eschatology. Okay? So then the question then is, how did we develop this particular framework of eschatology, where a war in the Middle East will lead to the third temple, the return of the Jews to Israel, the war of Gog and Magog, and the coming of the Antichrist, before the coming of the Messiah? Where does the story come from? And what I will show you now is that this is actually a persistent story in the Middle East. The first thing that I need you guys to appreciate is the Middle East, especially the Levant, is the most important part of the world. Why? Because historically, it's been the wealthiest part of the world. All right, so let's look at the Levant. This is the Levant, okay, which includes present-day Israel, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon. What's below the Levant? Egypt. What's above the Levant? Anatolia. Then if you go further east, what do you get? You get Mesopotamia, okay? If you keep on going east, what do you get? You get Persia. Okay? And then if you keep on going east, you get India. Okay? And historically, this part of the world was the center of the universe. The wealthiest, the most advanced, the most geopolitically important. And the hinge, the pivot, is the Levant. Okay? Now, historically, Egypt and Mesopotamia were the wealthiest parts of the world. By the way, Mesopotamia includes Babylon and Assyria. Okay? All right? So everyone wants to conquer Egypt, but the way to conquer Egypt is through the Levant. So whoever controls the Levant has a huge advantage over everyone else. Okay? Now, because of a historical accident called the Bronze Age collapse, the Israelites came into being. Okay? Israel. And Israel is a crossroads of empire. And again, this was a historical accident. You had the Bronze Age collapse, so Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and Egypt declined in power, which allowed for a new power to arise in the Levant called Israel. But they only stayed in power for about 1,500 years. After that, they became a subject to an empire, which is a historical norm. But because they were so important, it was easy for Israel to keep on switching sides. Maybe today they supported Israel, the next day they supported Mesopotamia, then they supported Anatolia, okay? But whoever paid them the most, whoever brought them the most, they would support. And so this area became the most contested territory in the world, which led to all sorts of apocalyptic wars, okay? Lots and lots of death. And the Israelites suffer the most because obviously their location led to a lot of conflict. Now, the Israelites created something called the Bible. And this would change human history forever because what the Bible is, it's a collective memory. And the Israelites were called people of the book. Okay? So to be an Israelite meant that you believe the Bible. And what's the Bible? The Bible is a collection of stories that became your collective memory. So it's entirely possible with the Bible now for people to have never been to Israel, to not be Israelite in blood, but to read the Bible and then imagine themselves as an Israelite. Okay, and this is unique in human history. And if you're an Israelite, what do you want to do? You want to return to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is where God lives. Okay? If you want to fulfill your destiny, you must return to Jerusalem. So what's happening in this time is that the Levant is contested territory. The Israelites are a pain in the ass to deal with. And different empires try different solutions. You could try to bribe them, and then ultimately the solution they came up with is, you know what, let's just remove them from Israel. So they went to Babylon, something called the Babylon exile. Okay? But remember, they have the Bible with them. So even though they are now removed from Israel, the land itself, and the people, the priests still have this historical memory of Israel. So they long to return to it. Then what happened was that Persia, under Cyrus the Great, comes and conquers Babylon, and he meets these Jewish priests who long to return to Israel. And then what the Persians figure out is, hey, if we insert the Jews back into Israel, and now they are strangers in a strange land, they must be loyal to us only, because only we can protect them. Only we can protect identity. Okay? So the Persians would sponsor the return of the Israelites to Israel, and now they're called the Jews. Okay? And now what's happened is not only the Jews long to return to Israel, but they also recognize that only by working with an empire against other empires can we return to Israel. Okay? And this pattern will repeat itself throughout human history. Okay? So after the Persians, the Romans come, and again, the Romans need to control this territory because of Egypt. The Jews rebel against because the Romans insist that the Jews obey Roman law, obey the emperor, think the emperor is divine, but that goes against Jewish belief, okay? This leads to a series of wars. Rome kills the Jews. The Jews are forced into Arabia, the Arabian desert. And there, they take their Bible and they start teaching the locals about their religion. And this will give rise to a new religion called Islam. Back here in the Levant, a new religion is rising in order to try to control the Jews, and this new religion is called Christianity. And of course, Christianity will also give rise to Orthodox. Orthodoxy, which is the religion of the Russians, okay? So the eschatology is so similar because all the major religions come from this conflict in the Levant. And the pattern that emerges is the Jews are central to this story because the Jews are trying to return to Jerusalem, build the temple, which is where their God lives. But to do so, they must fight empires that are trying to use them as pawns. Also, for the Jews to thrive, they need a leader, okay? And this leader is called the Messiah. And it was prophesied in the Bible that God would send the Messiah, the Son of Man, to lead them to ultimate victory. But historically, whenever the Jews try to revolt, they lose. So now the problem is you have this great story, you have this great belief, this pattern repeats itself over time, but how do you explain the failure of the Messiah? And the answer, of course, is the Antichrist. What is the Antichrist? The Antichrist is the false prophet, the false Messiah. So this is a story that doesn't really work, and so they add the story in a certain way to make it believable, okay? So rather than say, you know what, the Messiah came and we lost, so this means the story is nonsense. No. That was not the real Messiah. That was a lesser Messiah or the Antichrist. Okay? We need lesser Messiahs or the Antichrist to come before the Messiah himself can come. Okay? And this is how we got the story. What's amazing about this is that this story would be applied throughout the history of this area. So after the Roman-Jewish wars, the next thing we have, about 600 CE, is the rise of Islam and the rise of Muhammad. And if you look into the history of the rise of Islam and the Muhammad, a very similar framework where there's just two empires fighting each other, the Romans and the Persians, and a Messiah emerges, Muhammad, to unite the world, the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians, and they very quickly return to Jerusalem and build the temple to God, the third temple, which is now called the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Okay? All right? So in other words, the history of the Middle East has been condensed into a simple eschatological story that gives us insight into how geopolitics works in the Middle East. For the longest time, the Middle East, especially Levant, was a crossroads of empire, so there's always going to be wars fought over that territory. The Jews long to return to Jerusalem, so they're going to figure out ways in order to return to Jerusalem, and that often means working with different empires. Okay? And during this war, you're going to have Messianic fever. You're going to have people who believe that I am Messiah, and they're going to come and lead the Jewish people. And because the Jewish people are looking for Messiah, well, then he becomes the Messiah because he volunteers to be the Messiah. Okay? And when he fails, he's like, no, hey, he's actually the lesser Messiah, or he's the Antichrist. Okay? And this is a pattern that is consistent in the Middle East, and therefore we can assume that this is a pattern that will continue. Okay, so we can expect the next few years the same thing will happen, where maybe in the Middle East a man will emerge and he declares himself the Messiah because everyone is expecting the Messiah to emerge. And if he fails, then he's just the Antichrist, or he's a lesser Messiah. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. And a lot of this is being driven by the idea of imperial decline. Okay? Meaning that this is possible because the empire is too weak to stop this messianic vision from emerging in the Levant. Okay? And the empires, which before included Rome and Persia, they would externalize their internal conflict. So we can see from this how all this combines together, okay? Eschatology is just geopolitics told in a story. And the main driver of geopolitics, and eschatology is imperial decline. All right? Because it loses equilibrium, it loses stability, and so all these events converge together in one particular pace. Okay, does that make sense, guys? Okay, now I want to discuss another question, which is, why is eschatology so powerful? Okay? How is it possible for eschatology to drive geopolitics? And the answer has to do with the structure of power in society. Okay? So let me explain what's going on. Okay, so the first thing you guys need to appreciate is that the occult is the basis of everything. Okay, the occult is the basis of reality. The occult means basically esoteric or hidden knowledge, or a mystical understanding of how the universe works. Okay. Another way of saying this is action comes after ideas. Only if we can imagine the action can the action actually take place. Okay? And the occult are these mystics who are trying to figure out the secrets of the universe, which includes alchemy, eschatology, astrology, okay? Okay, alchemy is just trying to transmute or transform nothing into something, okay? Basically lead into gold or death into life, okay? They're trying to animate things. Eschatology is an understanding of how the world ends. Astrology is an understanding of how the moving the stars influences historical patterns, okay? All right, so these are the three main fields. Now, there are people in power, okay, who form secret societies. And there are lots and lots of them, okay? And they form secret societies because they want to access the secrets of the occult in order to gain more power and wealth for themselves. Because if you think about it, the more secrets you have, the more power you have, okay? So that's why they form secret societies, in order to worship the occult, in order to obtain more power for themselves. Once these secret societies and these occult form an alliance, they transform each other, okay? The occult before was very much just focused on esoteric knowledge. But once it comes in contact with these secret societies, then they focus more about eschatology, okay? Because now they have the mechanism, the means, in order to achieve their eschatology and the end of the world. The elite like eschatology because they believe that if they're able to bring up about the end of the world, then they themselves can have the most power because they'll be close to God. Also, what's important for you guys to understand is secret societies do not believe they can change the world. They don't believe they can actually alter the course of history. What they believe is they can ride the wave of history into absolute power. Okay? And then once this alliance is formed, what they do now is they basically select leaders or agents or puppets or scapegoats, okay, whatever name you want to call them, and become the person who propels history forward, okay? These are the agents. And historically, these people included Napoleon, or Julius Caesar, or Hitler, or Stalin. Today, they are, of course, Trump and Putin. Because you need an individual to capture the imagination of the people and create action in order to achieve this eschatology. Okay, does that make sense? So this is a basic framework of how history happens. Okay, you always need the occult in order for history to happen. If you don't have the occult, you end up like China, okay? China just focuses on harmony and balance. All right. Once you have the occult, then that gives rise to secret societies who then pick agents in order to achieve the eschatological vision. Okay, now I want to discuss why these secret societies are so powerful. And it has to do with the structure of society, okay? So society is often bureaucratized into different departments. you have the military, you have the political system, you have science or religion, you have finance, you have the bureaucracy. Okay? So just basically different segments of society. Now, within each segment, you're going to have a range of personality types. Most people just want to live normal lives. They want to get along. They want to collect their paycheck, go home, and raise their families. That's all they care about. About 90% of people are like that, okay? Then you have some extreme people who are more idealistic. Then you have more extreme people who are power hungry, okay? And these people that are power hungry, they converge together and they work together because they're all more interested in order and control. All right? In order to obtain more order and control, they form secret societies. And once they have these secret societies, they're able to achieve three things that give them more power and control over other people, okay? The first is secrecy. The second is trust. The last is coordination. Okay? And how they're able to achieve this is through eschatology. Eschatology is a script for them to act out. Okay? And that allows for them to coordinate even though they may not know actually what they're doing. Okay? Because they're all trying to achieve the same script. Okay? Does that make sense so far? Okay, are there any questions before I continue? Any questions? Okay. All right. So now what I want to discuss is this. Why is eschatology so powerful? Why does it compel us to do things that are, from an outsider's perspective, irrational or extreme or fanatical, like start wars in the Middle East? And the argument I want to make to you is that the reason why is that eschatology that we have today in the Middle East, it is fundamentally sexual in nature. Sexual in nature. All right? So remember this. That the eschatology, it's not just an idea. It's sexual. It's something that you want to move towards. You're driven by this sexual urge in order to fulfill the eschatology, okay? All right. So let me explain how this works. All right, so we first start off with the occult, right? And I'm going to show you how it leads to eschatology. Okay, so the most dominant understanding of the occult is something called Hermeticism. Hermetic philosophy. It comes to us from Egypt. Okay? And there are 7 basic principles of Hermetic philosophy. Okay. The first is that everything is mind. Everything is energy. Everything is vibration. So you start off with a source. We'll call it the monad or the source. And what the source does is it breathes, it emanates, it thinks, it meditates. And so it vibrates, okay? Om, okay? And it's infinite, okay? So it has infinite vibrations, okay? And the higher the vibration is, the faster it is, okay? The lower it is, the slower it is. And so this gives rise to the material world. So yes, so even though the dimensions are infinite, we can roughly classify them in different categories, okay? At the very bottom is the material world, which is our world. Then you might have the emotional. Then you might have the spiritual. Then you might have the divine, okay? All right? Now, according to Hermetic philosophy, there are certain characteristics about this universe. Okay? The first is that there is rhythm to it. Okay? Meaning there's a pattern to its vibrations. It's not just random chaos. There's a pattern to it. And this pattern will become the basis for astrology, right? That's what astrology is. Astrology is trying to figure out the pattern of the stars, okay, which determines the movement of the universe. Second thing is the idea of correspondence. All right? What correspondence means is that divine, spiritual, emotional, material, they all line up. Okay? They all correspond to each other. They're not different realms. They're all realms that can influence each other. This then leads to the idea of cause and effect, which is that the entire universe is combined together, so that what happens in the material world can impact the divine. What happens in the divine can impact the material. Okay? And what this means, and this is really interesting, is that you can have impact on others as well. So this gives rise to the idea of telepathy. Okay? And there's a belief that if you meditate long enough, okay, if you will it long enough, you can make something happen. There's something called the idea of manifestation. Okay, so there are many secrets to this. Okay? This gives rise to the idea of as below, so above. And this has to do with the idea of the interconnectedness of this universe. And what this means basically is that the universe are just fractals of each other. Okay? Fractals of each other. So you, in your mind, you are just a fractal of the entire universe. And the entire universe is a reflection of you yourself. Okay? Does that make sense? As above, so below, as below, so above. The interconnectedness of everything. Okay. Then this gives rise to the idea of polarity. Polarity just means opposites. So if there's a black, there must be a white. If there's a female, there must be a male. Okay? So the universe is divided into extremes, into opposites. Then this gives rise to the idea of generation, the generative principle. Okay? So you have generation and production. So production is the female, generation is the male. Okay? And this is a fundamental movement of the universe, where new things are created when the male and the female come together, when the yin and the yang come together. All right? So think of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And this is what allows for the universe to constantly create new things. Okay? So these are the 7 fundamental principles of the universe. First, everything is energy, everything is mind, everything is vibration. That's number 1. Number 2 is there's a pattern to all this. Number 3 is the different dimensions correspond with each other. They're all connected somehow. Number 4 is cause and effect, where if you make one movement in the material world, you can also influence the divine. Okay? You can also influence others as well. As above, so below, so that we're all reflections of God itself, the universe itself. Polarity, there are opposites, and these opposites work together to create the life force. Okay? That allows for creativity. Okay, so these are 7 basic principles of the universe. Okay? And this has been known for a long time, ever since the Egyptians, then it went over to India. So now what's going to happen is about 1100 to 1200, okay, around this time, a new force is something called Luranic capitalism is going to come into being. Okay? Why? Because Hermetic philosophy is the most intuitive understanding of the universe. The Bible are the most powerful stories in the universe. And so what Isaac Luria, who is a Jewish rabbi, what he's going to do is he's going to combine the two together. Meaning he's going to take the stories of the Bible and explain it using Hermetic philosophy. Okay? So let me give an example. Story of Adam and Eve in the Bible. Great story. All right? God created Adam, and then from Adam created Eve, and told the two together, and told the two, this is the Garden of Eden, this is paradise, you'll never die, you'll always have enough to eat, you guys can have sex every day, but there's only one thing I ask you not to do, and it's like, don't eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge. And that's it, guys. That's all you have to do. Don't do that. And then, of course, they eat that stupid fruit and they get banished from the Garden of Eden. Okay? So this is a story of the Bible. And the question that's plagued many religious scholars for thousands of years is, why did they screw up? Okay? And now what they're going to do is they're going to take Hermetic philosophy and explain the story of Adam and Eve using Hermetic philosophy. Okay? And this explanation. The explanation is, in the beginning, God was everything. Okay? God was everything. God is eternal, immutable, perfect. But it wants to know itself. It's curious. It wants to expand itself. Okay? And God is the will to bestow. The will to give, the giver. But if you are the will to bestow, then you need something to give it to. You need something to give yourself to, okay? So what God does, he contracts, he starts to build the universe. The first being that he creates is something called Adam Kadmon. Okay? Which becomes the will to receive. Okay? Or the ego. Does that make sense, guys? Okay? So God, in order to bestow, must create a new being called Adam Kadmon so that he can bestow himself onto Adam Kadmon, okay? The problem, though, is that Adam Kadmon is the ego. So he can only see the world through the lens of selfishness. God is love. God is forgiveness. God is generosity. So God wants to give. But Adam's like, why do you want to give to me? All right? So the analogy is, let's just say I invite you to my house. And I am honored that you're coming to my house, and I cook you a wonderful meal. Okay? 12 courses. It's sumptuous. You come into my house, and you are shocked. You're embarrassed by my generosity. You run away because you think to myself, does he want to borrow money from me? Like, why is he being so nice to me, okay? It scares you. And that's why Adam and Eve disobeyed God, because they were embarrassed by the generosity of God. They were too immature, they were too egotistical, too selfish to appreciate the generosity of God, okay? And so when this happens, when Adam and Eve betrayed God, this is something called breaking the world. And the point of the universe is to repair the world. How do you repair the world? By making yourself so enlightened that you can now receive the generosity of God and create a reunion, okay? That is the repair of the world, a reunion. Now, there are different ways in which you can do this. Okay, the way they teach you is just basically self-enlightenment. Through education, through knowledge. Another way is love. Okay, love thy neighbor. Embark on a journey, a lifelong journey, to be as nice and kind to people as possible. Okay, the modern term for this is, of course, called social justice. All right? Just try to save as many people as possible. But there's a third way, and the third way is the most controversial, which is the idea of sin. Okay? And the idea of sin is you must break yourself before you can learn the wisdom to welcome God into your heart. And the story that explains this idea is the story of David. Okay? King David was the greatest ruler of the Israelites. And one day he falls in love with a woman named Bathsheba. And David is king because he's close to God. God favors him, okay? He falls in love with Bathsheba. The problem, okay, and so Bathsheba and David have sex. Bathsheba becomes pregnant. The problem is that Bathsheba is already married to a warrior named Uriah the Hittite. So David thinks of many ways of solving this problem, and ultimately he decides, I'm just going to kill this guy, okay? So he kills Uriah the Hittite, and he marries Bathsheba, and he's very happy, and Bathsheba's going to give birth to their son. God learns about this and sends his prophet Nathan to David and says, King David, do you know what you've done wrong? And David's like, not really. I mean, what did I do wrong? I don't know. So God gets angry and punishes David by killing his son. And this forces David into mourning. And when he mourns, he breaks his heart. When he breaks his heart, he welcomes God back into his soul. And the two become the best of friends. Because every day now, David is praying to God, and God is answering him. David has given up all the material desires of this world and fully embraced God. He's humbled himself before God. He's become God's servant. Every day he asks for forgiveness. He's engaged in poetry, in prayer. Okay? So the Israelites remember David not as a great conqueror, not as a great king, but as a man who understood his humility, who always asked for forgiveness, who was best friends with God. Okay? And this is the idea of repairing the world. Nothing matters except your relationship with God. The whole world could be a nuclear war. Doesn't matter. Okay? What matters is your true faith in God. And so from these three things, we now understand what's going on in Gaza and the Middle East, where the Israelis think that, hey, if I break the world, and I force the entire world to hate me, and I sin so much that I suffer, that's a good thing, because that's going to let me develop a close relationship with God, and this will repair the world. But, and this is really important, okay? We also need to appreciate is that there are also Jews in the mind, and who are more numerous than the Israelis, who think, no, that's wrong. What's important is the idea of social justice. Okay? To stand for what is right. That's why during what was happening in Gaza, if you go to American universities, the protesters, most of them were actually Jews, protesting what's happening in Israel. Okay? So this shows you the diversity and debate within the Jewish tradition. But it also tells us they're actually looking for the same thing. Okay? What they're looking for is reunion with God. Now, why I bring this up is that the idea of the Kabbalah, because it's able to take the stories of the Bible and make it mystical and give it a deeper meaning, the Kabbalah has become the most powerful mystical tradition in the world. It becomes the basis for most secret societies, especially the Freemasons, okay? Which control America. Okay. And the thing about the Kabbalah that we need to appreciate is that it's different from other occult traditions in that it's sexual in nature. Okay? You are moving towards a synthesis. You're moving towards a reunion with God. And the sexual aspect to the Kabbalah is what energizes, galvanizes people into action. Okay? The sexual nature comes from its physicality. It's corporality, okay? Corporality. The fact that you can feel it, the fact that you can touch it. Most mystical traditions are just monks meditating, okay? Meditating and trying to achieve the divine. The Kabbalah is about achieving the stories of the Bible, becoming David, okay? Becoming Moses, becoming Isaac, Joseph. All right? So, because of the Kabbalah, the eschatology becomes sexual in nature. Because it's sexual in nature, it energizes us, okay? It becomes very urgent and immediate. And that helps us explain why things are happening so fast. Because the people involved, these societies, they're trying to climax as soon as possible, okay? They believe that the faster I move, the more I'll be able to reunite with God, okay? So they want to accelerate. This is accelerationism, okay? Accelerationism. All right? Okay, you have a question?
I think if the people in the secret society see, they need to see the Kabbalah as a sexual thing, I think the condition that they must have a strong belief. But I think a belief is rational. How can it be sexual to them, just like the sex of human, that it's sort of a sense of biological?
Okay, okay, I hate to say this, but you're way too young to understand what's going on, okay? It's hard for me to explain to you using theory. You just have to know this. Okay, belief is not abstract. Okay, belief is your soul, your heart. Belief is what your soul aspires to. And for most of human history, most religious traditions believe that the soul was divine. Okay, it was not material. It's removed from the material. The Kabbalah, by almost an accident, it makes the soul almost have a sexual urge. Okay, so it drives the soul to action. All right. Again, I can't explain this to you. You either know this or you don't know this. Okay? All right. Okay, so this is the eschatology. All right. So to further explain to you what's going on, I'm going to use a metaphor, okay, called Plato's cave. We've said this before. Okay, Plato's cave. So what Plato's cave is going to do is it's going to take all this occult, hermetic understanding and transform it into a story that we can all understand. And once we understand the story, it helps us better understand the movement of history, okay? So Plato's cave, so imagine a cave, and there's a blank wall, all right, in front of everyone. And everyone is lined up together as prisoners. They are chained to the floor. They're stuck there, and there's about 1 million of them, okay? And their necks are shackled so they can't move and look behind them. Behind them is a great fire. And there are certain people, we don't know who they are. It's just like they, okay? Plato just uses the word they to describe them. And what they do is they take shadows and project the shadows onto the wall. And the people, the prisoners, don't know any better, so they think these shadows, who are just random shapes, it's reality itself, okay? It's like you live in 3 dimensions, but you see two dimensions, and so you think only 2 dimensions exist. And so they give names to these 2-dimensional shapes, they give it language, they create a world around these things, okay? This becomes reality itself. All right. Okay. So the thing to know about this is that what wealth is consciousness. All right? And this is what Hermetic philosophy teaches us, which is like everything is just consciousness. The imagination is the animating force of the universe, okay? Remember this idea. The imagination, our mind, are what gives life to the universe. The second thing is that power is the ability to direct consciousness. All right? Which is just, so the example, of course, is money. All right? So money is not real. Money is something that we just made up, but we believe it's real. And those who can make us believe money is real are the ones who have the real power. Okay? So does it make sense? All right. So what we do now is I'm explaining to you how Plato's allegory of the cave explains the world that we live in. Okay? So there are 2 competing forces, 2 competing power centers. There'll be money and AI, artificial intelligence. Okay? Money and AI. Okay? All right. So let's look at money. All right, the banks. So in theory, how this works is depositors, you guys, you save enough money, and then you put your money in the bank, like $1 million, okay? then what the bank does is take this $1 million and to create wealth in society, gives it to entrepreneurs, loans it to entrepreneurs to create value in society, okay? Entrepreneurships. And so in theory, the bank should have zero, okay? Because what it's done is it's taking your hard-earned money and giving it to entrepreneurs to create more value, to give you jobs, okay? And this is what we believe how society works. There's a problem with this. The problem is that if you look at the bank balance sheet, when it does this, when it takes $1 million and lends out $2 million, it doesn't have zero, it has $2 million. So the great secret of our world is that banks have the power to print as much money as they want. So money, if you think about it, is actually valueless, okay? But it's like lead. But in our world, it becomes gold. So this is a secret of alchemy. How are banks able to trick you into believing that lead is gold? By using your imagination. By focusing your imagination in a world that animates the world, okay? So this is about imagination. And this is the world that we live in. All right? The thing that makes money valuable, and the only thing that makes it valuable is the idea of omnipresence. It's everywhere. Okay? So let's just say I convince all you guys that US dollars are worth nothing. And you're like, yes, I agree. You go to America and you want to buy something, you're like, so you buy a snack, and the guy's like, okay, $5. And you're like, yeah, but this money is worthless. And he's like, screw you, man. Where's my $5? Okay, do you understand? It doesn't matter what you believe. The money is valuable because it's everywhere and everything, okay? It is God. So we created a society in which money is God because money is everywhere. And God is everywhere, okay? All right, so the problem with money, though, is that if you can create out of thin air, you must constantly destroy it as well. Does it make sense to you guys? The banks can create money out of thin air, and the banks have to figure out ways to destroy money as well. Otherwise, you have too much money and no one's going to work, right? The point of money is to get people to work, and that means scarcity. And so the way you do that is by creating a there are two ways, okay? The first is financial collapse. Okay, basically a recession or depression. The point of this is just to remove money from the system, okay? It's wealth destruction because you've printed too much money. So you need to destroy this money. Second way, of course, is for wars. And this helps us explain why things are happening the way they are. Because these past 10, 20 years, the Americans printed too much money, and now they need to create wars and to destroy this money so that the global economy can continue, okay? The problem with this is that it makes people question the authority and the legitimacy of the elite. And because of elite overproduction, this gives a possibility for a new elite to arise, and this new elite is AI, okay? So remember that money is alchemy in that it's turning lead into gold. Well, guess what, guys? AI is also alchemy in that it's turning lead into gold, okay? Let me show you how. Okay, so I'm gonna put this in very simple terms. But when you use AI, what you're trying to do is, you have a database, you have lots of information in this database, and you're trying to search and sort this database, okay? There's information in this database, you're trying to organize this information in a way that is useful, and you're trying to search information from this database that you need at this moment, okay? So think of like Google search, right? Google has all the information in the world, it's a database. Google organizes it, sorts it, and then what you do is you search for it, okay? So Google is just a database. All right. The problem with the database is eventually you reach a point where there's just too much information and you don't really know how to search and sort it properly. So what you do is you train the computer to do it for you. Okay, how? So let's for example, use facial recognition technology. Let's just say you have like 1 billion faces, 1 billion faces. Now what you're trying to do is you're trying to differentiate these billion faces, and you're trying to match it to the proper name, okay? You have a face database, you have a name database. And you're trying to align the two together, okay? You don't know how to do it, but so what you do is you train a computer to do it for you. And so what you do is you create a system of weights, just 1 million variables, okay? Variables. And then the input, okay? The input are just the databases, right? And then the output is yes or no. Does it match or doesn't it match, okay? Depending on the output, this information is fed back into the database and the weights, okay? And so what the computer is doing is it's changing the weights in a certain way that allows for all these billion faces to match up with their names, right? And we call this back propagation. And that's how AI works. And that's all it does, okay? Is it possible for us to advance beyond this? The answer is no. I don't care what you tell me, okay? I've done a lot of research into the AI. There's absolutely nothing more we can do than back propagation. What we do now is we now give it names to make it sound very fancy, okay? So the weights is now called a neural network. Okay? The back propagation is called deep learning. And this together is called AI. Okay? That's it. Okay? This is all hallucination. It's just clever marketing. That's all it is. We will never get beyond this. Okay? And this is what allows for large language models. Okay, so you have a similar situation in that money is just being printed out of thin air, and you have a similar situation where AI doesn't actually do anything. Okay? So how you solve this problem is twofold. The first thing you do is you create omniscience. Okay? What does this mean? It means the way to solve the money problem is by making money everywhere, right? Well, the way to solve the AI problem is having AI know everything. That means combining every single database in the world into one major database. Does it make sense? Okay? That's the idea, where you're born, the hospital, your health records, it's all in one database. You go to school, what are you doing in school? What your teacher say about you? It's all in the same database. When you grow up, what job you do, what you buy, it's all in one database. Your police record, one database. Your health records, one database. Okay? Your browsing history, one database. And then I have omniscience on you. Okay? Then it gives the illusion of AI, of God, because he knows everything about you. Okay? And then the second thing it does is it becomes a religion. Okay? For AI to be fully AI, it needs to turn itself into a religion where everyone is worshiping it. And the way you do that is by making people believe that this thing is alive, because demons have been summoned into it. Because Jesus is resurrecting itself through AI. You understand? Okay? You want to trick people to believe that behind all this electricity, behind all these semiconductors, it's an interdimensional portal for demons, for Jesus to come alive in. Once people believe that, then the imagination takes effect, and the imagination will then animate the AI. Okay? That's the trick. Once they achieve these two things, omniscience and religion, then AI will be achieved in this world. Okay? So what's happening today is a civil war, okay, in the world, where right now money, which is controlled by transnational capital, is God. they're trying to create a new god called AI, okay? An AI god, okay? So there are three forces opposed to transnational capital. They are nationalism, religion, and AI, okay? And altogether, they're trying to create a AI god in order to replace money. Okay, so I was talking to my wife about this idea, and one question she has for me is, what's the conflict here? What's the problem? Why is there war? Why can't transnational capital just become the AI god? And the answer is, because these are two fundamentally different systems. Okay, think like this. I'm going to put this in very simple terms, but think of transnational capital as capitalism, okay, free market capitalism. And what is AI God? It's techno-Marxism, okay? The difference is this. The difference is that with money, everyone still has a lot of freedom, okay, to generate as much money as possible, but there's still freedom in place. Whereas with a techno-Marxist system, you have an elite who control the God, AI God, who then control all your attention, okay? It's basically techno-slavery. So imagine a computer chip implanted into your brain that tells you everything, okay? You don't have to think anymore. You just have to listen to this microchip. Tells you, hey, you should get up at 7 o'clock in the morning. When you get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, go run for half an hour. And you fall in love with the system because you don't have to think anymore. There's this microchip who you think is actually the voice of God. It's an angel, it's a demon, but it's all coming from God, okay? And this microchip this AI system is helping you live the best possible life. You're now more healthy. You're now more hardworking. You're more successful. You find happiness in your life, okay? So this is where the world is going. And underneath everything that we've seen so far, the geopolitics, this is actually the real conflict in the world, the real transition in the world where one God, money, is being replaced by another God, the AI God, okay? All right, so what I've done is basically giving you a complete understanding of how the world works, a framework, a predictive history framework for understanding how the world works, which then allows us to make predictions about the world, okay? Depending on our predictions, the accuracy of our predictions, we can then go back and refine this model, all right? So basically, the entire point of this class is help us observe the world better, to learn about the world better, okay? So again, it's all speculation. I'm not saying this is 100% correct, all right? Most of this may even be wrong, but at least it gives us a framework for us to learn about ourselves and the world around us, all right? Okay, any questions?
Question about money, which is that USA have like around 39 trillion national debt, but if the banks really have the power to print as more money as they want, why don't they just print some money and like hide them and solve this debt?
Okay, yeah, okay, again, I mean, all right, I'll explain it to you. All right. Okay, all right. Well, how does the debt work? The debt is very simple. I'm the US government, okay? I don't print money, but I need to spend money. So I borrow the money, right? So I borrow the money from something called the Federal Reserve, which is able to print money. Okay, do you understand so far? All right. But for the Federal Reserve to lend you money, they want to profit from it. So they charge you an interest, right? 5% is usually the interest. So right now, the US government debt is $39 trillion in debt, right? Now, interest rate means the US government has to pay $2 trillion a year in interest payments alone. And you're like, well, why doesn't the US government just not pay the interest? Because it's a government. It can do what it wants. No, that's not how the system works, because the Federal Reserve borrows its money from banks, which then borrows its money from depositors. Okay? Does that make sense? From you, basically. So you're the one, and you don't even know you're the one doing it, but you're the one lending money to the US government. So the government has to pay you back interest. Okay? So if the US government would say, screw this, I'm not paying off this debt, then this entire system collapses. And then people recognize that it was all just a hallucination. Money is not God. Money is not valuable. Money is worthless. It's just lead. I thought it was gold all this time, and now it's just lead. So what do? You revolt. You burn things down. You're angry now. Okay? So the US government cannot afford to not pay off this debt.
So despite that, the Federal Reserve can print as much money that they want, but they still cannot solve this problem, right? Because if the U.S. government really choose not to pay the interest, the whole system just collapse.
Okay. So you need to prioritize ideas. This is just the surface. This is what we just look at. Underneath all this is Plato's cave. What Plato's cave teaches us is that as long as we believe that money is real, then it's real. So this entire system is set up to trick us into believing money is real. Okay? As long as we believe money is real, this doesn't matter. The US government could have like $500 trillion in debt. Who cares? As long as you're willing to still use money, as long as you're still willing to believe in money as God, this doesn't matter. The problem is that from a fiscal perspective, you have too much debt, then it's harder and harder for you to run the government, okay? It's harder and harder for you to run the government, and people are no longer getting basic services like healthcare and water, then they question the very foundations of society, which leads them to question the very foundations of money itself, okay? So this is a huge problem. But you first have to understand that it's the human imagination that is the key. I need to trick you into believing something, okay? As long as I'm able to make you still believe in this thing, I'm okay. All right? Okay? Yeah, Alan?
So I have questions about money as well. As you say, like money is an hallucinations that prevent us from seeing the other like truths. But what is the motivations for those guys who create the motivations? Is that for power? But isn't power a hallucination as well? Like.
Okay, all right. Okay, so this is hard for you guys, okay? It's really hard. All right, okay, Plato's cave. All right. The imagination, the consciousness, is the energy of the world. You understand? It's the only thing that exists in this world. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to suck your energy for myself. You understand? Because the only energy is real. Everything else is false. Everything comes from energy. Everything comes from imagination. Okay? So how do I get your energy and then transfer it to me? By tricking you into believing that by using your energy, you're using it for yourself. And the mechanism that I do that is through money. Okay? All right? So the example is, let's just say I ask you to build me a house. Okay? I'm going to live in the house, and you're like, well, someone else is going to live in the house. I'm not going to live in the house, so I don't really care, okay? So you don't really do a serious job. You spend 5 days building me a house. It's a crappy house. So what I do now is I say, hey, Alan, let me give you $1 million to build me a house. Now you take it much more seriously, right? Now you spend a lot of time. You spend 2 years building me a great house for me to live in. So what I've done is I've taken your energy, your attention, and basically use it for my own ends. Does it make sense? Okay. Now, the only reason why you do that is you think that this $1 million is actually worth more than my own energy, right? Because in these 2 years, I could go read books. I could write poetry. I could go fishing. Why am I going to build this stupid house for this other guy? Because he gave me money, $1 million. Okay? Does it make sense? Right? So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to capture everyone's energy for myself. And the mechanism I do that is through money. If I can't use money, then I need to use something else. And that has to be AI. Okay? But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to capture your energy. your imagination, your consciousness, your attention, because that's the only value in this world. All right? Make sense? Okay, all right. So I present this theory, and you guys, what I want you guys to do for homework is think of this theory and come up with ideas, arguments against this theory, or show me where this theory is wrong, okay? And people online can participate as well. So on Thursday, we will do the final examination, okay? I'm gonna answer your questions, and we're gonna look at, and I will answer your questions using this theoretical framework. All right, so we can expand on it, better understand it. And what's really important is for everyone to constantly question and be skeptical about my ideas, because I'm also trying to figure out how the world works. And this is a theory that I have so far. Okay, all right, so I'll see everyone on Thursday.